Again, let me wish you good morning. Really excited to have you all back. I know that those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. We are studying How We Got the Bible. And last week we looked at kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about and what the discussion will encompass. And the first thing we talked about last week was ancient writings, ancient books, because the Bible is an ancient book. You know, what makes it ancient?
A long time ago.
It was written a long time ago, right? How long ago was the Bible written? What do we know of it?
Well,
In the first century.
Some of it was in the first century?
I think so.
Okay. The most
Moses.
recent writings were in the first century.
Moses,
How long ago did Moses live?
yeah, long time ago.
About 3,500 years ago, something like that. So somewhere around 1500 BC, the original the first writings we know were conceived and started to be written down, and traveled up through somewhere around 400 or 500 BC. When the Old Testament writings ended, there was a silent period there of about 400 years, and then a lot of writing happened in a very short period of time, within maybe 60 years or so. A lot of writing happened in a very, very condensed period of time. But this idea of the writings of Moses happening somewhere around 1500 BC brings up a lot of interesting points and a lot of interesting questions. And we talked a little bit last week about the fact that some have argued, well, there wasn't written language back then. There wasn't anything written down. And we now know that is not true. There was a lot of language being written back then. There were a lot of mechanisms for capturing words and thoughts back then. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at what did ancient writing look and feel like, how was it captured, going to go back in time a little bit in our minds and think about what it was like how did they do that? If you had something you wanted to write down for others to read and understand, how did you do that back then? Because obviously it was a lot different than it is today, right? I mean, even in our lifetime, you know, how would we write down thoughts and transfer them in our lifetime? Let's not think about the last 20 years, but just generally over our lifetime. How do we do that?
Computer.
Well, let's say before the computer. Before the computer, how do we do that? How do we capture thoughts and pass them along?
Pencil and paper.
Pencil and paper. Pencil and paper. Did I say that right? Yeah, that was one way to do it. Pen and paper. How else?
Chalkboard.
Chalkboard. Yeah, I remember the chalkboard. Good morning. The typewriter. I was going through. Say that again. What'd you say? The typewriter. Absolutely. My mother was an expert typist. Thank you. And I was going through her things yesterday, and I found the Remington typewriter that my grandfather gave her when she graduated high school. She would have been secretary. And so this, I would consider to be very old. It was probably somewhere around 66 years old or something. The keys didn't work anymore. They need some oiling. And it had the ribbon in there. Remember those? And, but it was a way of capturing thoughts, right? Capturing ideas. It looked old to me, but it's a very modern invention, right? If we think about the idea of writing our thoughts down, capturing them, and passing them on. The paper alone, this is a fairly new invention. That's what we're going to find out. That this actually, in the scheme of the history of mankind, is a very new invention. This takes a lot of technology to produce this. I'm not talking about the computer that printed it. I'm talking about just the paper itself. This is high technology here. This is something that's recently invented. So how did we do that? How did we capture thoughts? That's what we're going to look at today, the idea of ancient writings, ancient books. So we're going to look at ancient books, the birth of the Bible, manuscripts, texts and variations, the restoration of the Bible, the texts and the canonization, which is the capturing of what stays in, what goes out, what gets left out. What was left out, we're going to call the apocryphal books, or the other books. That's what that means. And then when the translation in English started to happen, in a meaningful way, somewhere around the early 1600s. There were English translations before that, but the one that really made an impact, we're going to look at here in 1611, and then recent translations. So we're going to start out here with ancient books, and you've got this in an outline, 2-page outline, and our hope is to cover all this in one day today. And this actually provides the foundation for us to leap off of. We can't really understand the process of capturing ancient writings unless we understand how do they do it, right? Well, what was the mechanism there that took place? So this is a very fundamental concept. So understand the Bible is very, very old. The thoughts here originate back about the capturing of it about 3,500 years ago. But the things that took place go back how far? Probably around 6,000 years. The images, the actions of mankind, things that happened, these are very old ideas, very old thoughts, very old things. And it took a while for them to actually begin to get captured. We talked last week about they were passed through an oral tradition for a long time, right? And then we had the mechanism to capture it, archive it, pass it on to a greater population outside of just my family. And that was the real act of writing it down. But it's not the oldest book in the world. Some Mesopotamian writings, Egyptian writings, go back to 3000 BC and the hieroglyphs. And I asked last week, anyone been to the British Museum? If you can ever do that, it's absolutely worth the airplane ticket. When you walk in, one of the first things you see is the Rosetta Stone. And the Rosetta Stone is an amazing thing. Another example where I just don't think that's an accident. That man found it when he did and where he did in the cultural time in which it was found. But it absolutely was a decoder for languages that had long been lost. And the hieroglyphs are one of them. You know, we had found these hieroglyphs written in Egyptian archaeological sites for centuries, but couldn't understand it, couldn't read it. It looked like gibberish. This is one of the reasons why people said, well, there wasn't a written language. You know, it was just gibberish, just pictures. You know, fish and birds and eyeballs and feet and legs. You know, it just looks like gibberish. My understanding of this, I'm not an absolute expert on this, but the French found this broken piece of stone in the desert in Egypt, the late 1700s, I believe. There was a war going on between France and England at the time, and the English eventually took over this area where this stone was, took it back to England, and come to find out, this Rosetta Stone actually had 3 languages on it. It was the same story written in 3 languages. One language we knew at the time. Another language was partially known, and this unknown language, the hieroglyphs. So through that stone, they would decode that this actually is a language, a 5,000-year-old language. And they were able to decode that. And so now they could go into all the Egyptian archaeological sites and read it. Right? It's a decoder. Amazing. Worth standing in front of and looking and absorbing. So we do have very, very old language. Alphabet developed somewhere around 1750 BC. So again, that predates Moses. So we have alphabet happening now. And what was in that Syria-Palestine area at that time? Who was living there? Who came from that area? God's people came from that area, right? I mean, they all came from this area. So this area gave birth to alphabet, gave birth to language, and obviously the Hebrews, you know, their language came out of that area. Early alphabetic script dates back to about 1500 BC, found very close to traditional Mount Sinai site. And so at least 5 different systems of writing are known to have existed during the time of Moses. So there was real writing. And where did Moses, who was he? Where did he come from? I know he was Hebrew, but what did he come up through? What do we know about Moses?
The Egyptian.
The Egyptian. Very wealthy nation, very highly sophisticated nation. If there was language to be written down, that's where it came from. We know the Egyptian language predates him by 1,500 years at least. Is that God's will that the person that would write down his word would come from a place where he could learn this type of technology, this type of, you know, advanced way to think and capture thoughts? That doesn't sound like a coincidence to me, right? We see that throughout God's plan, don't we? Things happen in the fullness of time. You wonder why things happen, why bad things happen? Well, look at the good that came out of that, out of his people going into captivity down there. So we see the origins of language coming out of this area, Palestine, Egypt. We see language existed. Well, how did we capture it? Again, we didn't have paper, right? Paper wasn't like a paper factory in Cairo. Right? I mean, that's not happening. But the earliest thing to capture things on was stone. Stone was everywhere, right? Chiseling stone. My son-in-law chiseled Mary me into a stone, right? It'll be there probably forever, right? To his future wife, right? He chiseled Mary me into a stone. This has been happening since the dawn of mankind, right? Writing in stone. Some of the earliest examples of writing are in stone. Lots of laws were written down in stone. I talked a little bit last week about, at the museum there, I saw this inscription where the Assyrians had captured what was happening. The historical events of the day were carved into stone. And there are actually events that we know of in the Bible captured in this piece of stone, right? This is a historical record that lives 4,000 years later, almost, right? So writing in stone was very, very common. I mean, all over the world. In fact, some of the first uses of the word God were found in this Moabite stone. It goes back about 840 BC. This is the first mention of the God of Israel. This stone, which was not Hebrew, right, was talking about the Hebrew God. It was captured in stone. Why chisel in stone? We talk about it's plentiful, lots of stone.
Longevity.
It lasts forever. I mean, almost forever, right? I mean, it's going to last a long time. The Rosetta Stone is very, very, very old. It's broken. It's not complete. But look how long that thing's lasted, and we've benefited from it centuries later, multitude of centuries later. So some of the oldest Hebrew writings found in Palestine are on stone. So the Ten Commandments were known to be written on stone. Why did God command that, you think, written on stone?
Longevity.
I mean, we've heard the term etched in stone, right? We say that term for a reason, right? What's it mean? It's etched in stone. It ain't going to change, right? Take your bank. What's that?
You're not going to erase
It's not going to erase it. Exactly right. It's going to be really hard to erase it. Exactly. Joshua commanded to write the words of the law on plaster and stone. We read about that in Deuteronomy as well. So stone, permanent, unchangeable, unerasable. You know, we read about some of the edicts of kings back in the Old Testament times that once they made a commandment, it couldn't be reversed. You know, you've heard about that? The king of Daniel, right? You know, when he made the decree, it couldn't be reversed, right? He regretted it, but it couldn't be turned off, right? These things were etched in stone. That's how they were written down. That's why they couldn't be turned off. Not only that, but if somebody came and reversed the king's order, what are you saying about the will and judgment and knowledge of the king? What are you saying about it? If it can be easily turned around and erased, what are you saying? The king's fallible. Well, the king cannot be fallible, right? So it cannot be reversed, ever, just on mere principle. And we see that today in our society, don't we? We see politicians that can't, they take it all the way to the end. They can't go back, right? It's essentially etched in stone. So that concept comes from, you know, how things are written down and the method and what it really meant back then. But then we evolved a little bit, developed clay, right? Ten Commandments is probably something what they look like. That's the Hebrew Ten Commandments in stone. But clay then became an advanced technology. What is clay?
Dirt.
It's dirt, mud. My brother-in-law and his wife do wonderful work in clay. They have a clay studio in their home, and they just make the most amazing things in clay. It's very fragile, though, up until the point in when it's baked, right?
Yeah.
Before that, it's very, very fragile. It's malleable. In fact, they even can recycle their clay. They have this thing they can put their clay in and recycle. Clay that isn't satisfactory or didn't turn out quite right, they can put it back through there, it molds it, switches it down. Clay became somewhat of a technological advancement. Let's write on clay, let's write on mud, but what happens to mud? Mud gets messed up, it falls apart, it breaks. So not quite as permanent, right? I can bake it and harden it, but it's still not quite as good as stone, but it's a lot easier, right? I can do a lot more on this. I can write more on it perhaps. Clay tablets might not weigh as much as stone. I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd want to read the Bible if it was written in stone. I don't know we could contain it, right? So clay became a bit more transportable, right? A little bit easier to capture larger writings. It was the most common writing material in Mesopotamia. Baked tablets. Ezekiel refers to this. Very durable, right? A lot of these have survived today. Not quite as durable as stone, but pretty good. And then you could take these tablets and make a book out of them, Well, that's pretty cool, right? I could take George's thoughts, I could take Ron's thoughts, I could take Dale's thoughts, I could put them together and make a book. That's pretty cool, right? Not any individual person had to write the entire book. Just give me your thoughts, put it together, make a tablet out of it. That kind of thing happened. That's pretty nice. And that goes back as far as maybe 2400 BC. We started to see this. So again, this is all before Moses' time. And we see lots of mention about clay tablets in the Bible, about the writings being written down on clay tablets. A lot of these chronicles of the kings were captured on clay tablets. And so we see this mentioned over and over again. So we know that there was stone writing, we know there was clay writing, right? We know that this was happening. Are those great? How much can I write in clay, though, in stone? How much? I'm kind of limited by quantity, right? If you've ever read the 4 books of the Old Testament, there's a lot of writing there. It had to be that still wasn't quite good enough, right? That wasn't good enough to capture the volume that God intended Moses to capture. So people started to develop other technologies, wood and wax. Don't think about this, but these are just more examples of some clay tablets. That'd be really hard to read. I go to some of these old cemeteries, and the tombstone is maybe 50 years old. You can't hardly read it, right? Imagine something that's 3,000 years old, right? Holding up pretty good. You can see we have lots of examples of events happening. Again, the British Museum is just filled with this kind of stuff. You can see what the people actually looked like at that day captured. I think it's fantastic. Definitely worth the trip. If you ever want to make a trip like that and just go back in time, I highly recommend that. And it's free if memory serves. So you have all these relief carvings, clay and stone tablets capturing everything. But then wax came along. What is wax?
It's all right till the sun gets.
Let's say that again.
It's all right till the sun.
Yeah, it'll melt. Right. So clay can melt, right? I can melt clay. I can squish clay. I can heat clay. Wax melts a bit easier, right? A little bit lower temperature, right? So I can, maybe I can make it's lighter than clay, right? I mean, wax is for sure lighter than stone and clay. So maybe I can capture more of these books. Here you go. Welcome. Maybe I can capture more. You can see here where the Romans had a wax writing tablet. Like an ancient Etch-a-Sketch. You know what the Etch-a-Sketch is? Right? You erase it, right? Shake it, erase it. That's basically what this was. I could write on this, melt it in the sun, or heat it, wipe it out, write again. It's like a notebook.
Reusable.
Reusable. That's pretty cool. I mean, that was a pretty good idea, right? These wood-framed writing tablets. So wax was very, very handy. The Greek and Romans used whitened boards called albums. All the words we have today came from those folks back then, didn't they? The term album was a term for whiteness, basically, the color of it. For public notices and inscription, right? In fact, they're thinking that the inscription on the cross above Jesus was probably written on one of these whitewashed boards like that. It was probably inscribed on something like this. That's been discolored from centuries, but they were white in color. They could write, you scratch on it, do an insignia on it, and nail it to something, right? It was perfect for that. That's probably what that was. Very, very, very popular back in Roman times and with the Assyrians. They could be fastened together like this to turn pages. And the Romans called this a codex. Probably heard the term codex before. That's where this term came from, right? And writings in Isaiah and Habakkuk probably refer to these wooden writings. They talk these wooden writing boards. They talk about this in the Hebrew language. So this goes back a long way. So these are ways for ancient peoples in their desire to capture thoughts. Make it easy for me to capture the thought. Do I have to go out with a hammer and chisel, thou shalt not do something in the chisel? I mean, it's going to take me a while, right? I'd much rather carve it into something softer, mud maybe, wax, pretty soft. Maybe I can erase it, reuse it. Something that's nailable, I can put it up for people to see, right? Didn't have glass display cabinets back then. Everything had to be sustained in the weather. So just go back in your mind 3,000 years and think about what they were dealing with back then and how did they capture something for people to pass on so there was no confusion. It's not oral anymore. It's written down for people to understand exactly what the writer meant. And this is how they had to do that back then. What are your thoughts about that? What do you think about it as you think about these ancient writing methods? Yes, Mom?
I think they were determined to write.
They were determined, yes. Yeah, they were,
Focused.
yeah, they were driven, right? There was a purpose in their life that drove them to write this down, right? Whether it's, I want to make sure people understand my instructions for you, let's be clear, right? I'm passionate about getting this message out, so I'm going to take the time to chisel and carve and bake, right? Or make this thing. I'm sure you could probably buy them, but a lot of these had to be probably made, right? Or it's God's word coming through you. I need to pass this on. Yes.
History, they wanted to
Preserve it.
preserve themselves
Yeah.
through what they left
Right.
written.
Yeah. They were to be lasting and be a legacy. And absolutely right. It wasn't a post-it note,
Right.
right?
History.
I throw away more post-it notes than I keep anything permanent today. Dale?
Well, it's also stuff that's becoming more accessible to the average person.
Mm-hmm.
Stone tablets, things like that would be obviously very heavy. They would be stored someplace that not
Big
everybody
one
can
copy.
always see.
Yeah.
They're getting into some stuff now where they can be out there accessible to every man rather than a select few.
Great point. Yeah, we talked last week about how, God communicated through the leader of the family, right? And then he went to, a bigger family. But it got to the point where I need to establish a nation, right? This needs to be accepted, this needs to be understood by a greater population outside of my influence. And it can be passed on, it can be duplicated, it can be replicated. I also think about the fact that this was expensive. I mean, you're going to pay somebody to chisel something in stone. You're going to pay somebody to spend the time to make a clay tablet and bake it and go out and acquire these things. They didn't have an Office Max where you could just go and drop $20 and get some notebook paper. This was expensive. The wealthiest, the ones who ran society essentially had the ability to capture this stuff and write it down, right? Because this was not a cheap undertaking. It was the religious authorities, the governmental authorities, that was who funded this stuff, right? If you've ever traveled Europe and seen the churches there, all the paintings in those churches are magnificent, but those are expensive, right? Somebody with the money had that produced, right? The average guy or gal just slapping paint on a
So you're saying it's become cheaper and less durable.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Everything.
Yeah, that's right. You remember when disposable? I about that. I remember when the lawnmower became disposable. Yeah, I'm never repairing a lawnmower. Thank you. So things have become cheaper and durable, but with the affordability comes access. Anybody now can capture their thought. We're all able to share our thoughts. Isn't that amazing how God handed this over to us? We're all part of the priesthood now, right? And with that became accessibility, affordability, and the ability to all be able to express our thoughts. I understand. Jim, do you have a thought?
Yes, when I went into churches in your church buildings, I was amazed at like gold
Yeah.
and stuff in there. Gold, the stained windows.
Yeah.
It was just opulent.
Yeah.
And I thought, the money, I'm used to this. The money they spent on that could have been used to feed
Yeah.
poor.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah. The work in the ceiling was amazing. Yeah, as opposed to we have drop tiles. Yeah, Ron?
I think when God made mankind, I think He created in each person, regardless of what culture or race or religion, inherently He created the ability to want to express themselves. I mean, if you doubt that, just look at the American Indians at their hieroglyphs. I mean, I found in northern Arizona hundreds of hieroglyphs where they would, if you could trace them back down, and I've done that. I spent one time a whole day tracing the maps they had on there. The maps are really pretty darn good maps. If you looked at them, you could see where they followed the high ground.
Yeah.
On a certain area where they followed it to water.
Yeah,
You know,
that's right.
so, and why did they do that? Well, they did it for the next person to come. They could see that and let it go their way.
Passing what they've learned to the next generation, those come behind them. And they always find these in caves.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, they did the.
Protected,
the
exactly
Americans
right.
did the same thing the same kind of process.
Mhm.
At one point, they had writings on skins and things.
Mhm.
But the issues with that were obviously
We're getting there.
durability. You
Yeah.
roll them up,
Yeah.
fold them up, you could transport them, but the writings would get damaged over time.
Yeah.
And skins were very valuable. You needed those more for clothes and things than you did
Yeah.
for writing.
Yeah,
So
rock was cheaper than, than that, for sure. We're gonna talk about that. Actually, you're looking ahead to point 7, that's exactly right. As the technology advanced and as people start to figure things out, how can I express myself? Hey, how come only the king gets to express himself on this expensive, why can I do it myself? I have access to some hide, maybe I can turn that into something I can carve it into, right? So, yeah, man has this drive within him to share what he knows and what he's learned. Absolutely, Ron, appreciate you sharing that. If you go up to page 2 here on our outline, you'll see it got a little even more advanced. Oh, here's a reconstruction of a Roman writing tablet. Again, you can see what these look like. This look amazingly familiar to what we have today. Spiral bound notebook with a pen. I mean, it's like, that's not, it didn't take a modern person to think about that. It kind of makes sense. How do I use on both? I did this yesterday. I got to figure out how to make my printer print on both sides. You know, I mean, it's just what we do, right? We figure out how to make the most out of what we have. Put them together, bind them together, so they stay in order, and something to catch it in. So man thought about this 2,500 years ago. Or maybe a woman thought about it.
It all came from God, He gave us a mind. to
That's
think.
right.
He gave us a mind to think about it.
That's right. Give us the mind to figure it out. Exactly right. Put it to good use. Yeah. This is very interesting. Metal. Okay, we talked about writing surfaces being expensive. Well, imagine gold. Why is gold maybe a good writing surface?
It's soft.
Soft, malleable. I can bend it. I can hammer it out. I can melt it down and I can now erase what was written down. It's not etched in stone anymore, right? That thing can be melted down and reused.
Doesn't
So-
rust or oxidize.
That's right. Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't oxidize. Yeah, it doesn't disintegrate. Right? Exactly. So gold as a writing surface is referred to back in Exodus. So this has been around for a long time. Again, I was married. My wife carved something on the inside of my wedding ring, my gold wedding ring. Very nice, right? When you carve something into gold, what are you saying?
Forever.
Yeah, you're saying something about, hey, this is worth it. This is really something important, right? This is really a valuable thing I'm writing here. I want this to be in gold, okay? So that's interesting now how the Romans and Greeks took this. They started using gold for treaties and decrees, maybe written on bronze tablets. Roman soldiers at the time of discharge were presented with a small bronze tablet called a diploma. Have you heard that word today? Of course. So you see where this practice goes back to ancient times, right? It granted special privileges in citizenship, just like a diploma does today, right? It says something to the bearer of the diploma, or it says something about the bearer of the diploma. 2 small silver scrolls containing this blessing, may the Lord bless and keep you, right? That's mentioned in Numbers. So, probably back to about the 6th century BC is the earliest known time that metal probably contained the words of the Scripture. So you can see this is coming along later, right? This is somewhat of more of a modern invention versus way back in maybe pre-Moses time. But metal is very, very interesting. Again, it's durable. This would have, if this was iron, what would have happened to that, George, over the years? It'd be unreadable, right? It just would have rusted, right? It would have started to disintegrate. So gold or bronze make a pretty good surface. And again, you can melt it down and reuse it. Ostraka. I love this. This concept is so cool. I mentioned the sticky note. This is the world's first sticky note. What are these? Well, these were potsherds, right? Pieces of broken pottery. So you have lots of pottery, right? People making pottery all the time, right? For cooking and storing and things like that. But what happens to these pots over time? They break. What do I do with a broken pot? Can I melt down the clay of a heated what's the word when you heat? What's my brother-in-law's here?
Fire.
Fire, thank you. When you fire that pot, can I reuse that clay? Can I melt that back down and make another pot out of it? No. It's done. You molecularly changed that. It was change at a molecular level. Got that word out. Change at a molecular level. That will not be malleable anymore. The only thing it's good for is breaking, throwing at somebody, maybe scraping, right? Well, how about, maybe I'll carve something. I can carve something in. These became little notes, little note cards. Scrap paper, basically. Just scrap paper. I do that a lot today. I take notes at my office when I'm working, and sometimes if I've got something going on in a meeting, whatever, I might only go halfway down the page and I'm done, right? I've got a bottom of the page. Do I throw the piece of paper away? I don't. I'll tear it and use the bottom. That's my note paper, right? So I just tear it off. Well, that's what these guys were doing, right? This was their scrap paper. This is their notebook paper. It's very, very common. Earliest forms go back to about 3100 BC, containing, information that we understand today. Hebrew alphabet of 22 letters was found on one of these dating to about 1100 BC. And there's many ostraka that have been found with short passages from the New Testament carved on them. So we're going to find out when we get to the point about restoring the text, how do we source that? There are lots of old pieces of scrap paper with the text written on them that we can now start to reference and say, Drew, you said in a meeting, I found this in your garbage can, and you said on that you would do this on the 10th of June, and uh-oh, found it in my garbage can? Scrap paper can be found everywhere, right? It validates something, right? So we have lots of these that validate the writings of the New Testament. So I think it's fascinating. And hence the word ostracized came from this, right? So the people of Athens ostracized their unpopular fellow citizens by writing the names of them on ostraka. So they used this to basically say, we're gonna etch your name in here, and you are banished. You were considered ostracized because your name was written on a piece of ostraka. I guess it's kind of interesting. We've taken that name today. What are your thoughts? These durable surfaces: stone, clay, metal, broken pottery pieces. What do you think about that? What comes to mind? Yes, sir.
Permanence.
Permanence, durability. Yeah. I do think that. I also think kind of clumsy, clunky, heavy, bulky, unwieldy. Yeah, it's a good word. Man, it's just about a library of this stuff. I don't know how you would ever, have a shelf to hold this stuff, right? It'd be kind of hard to transport, right? So I'm thinking about it. It was the way mankind learned to capture their thoughts and writings and ideas and start to express myself. But then came time for a mass production of thoughts and ideas. And two things came about that allowed that to happen. One is papyrus. Papyrus. Does that word sound like it turned into something? Paper. We got the word paper from. Exactly right. Papyrus, light, flexible. I can write a lot on this, right? I've got probably 15 pieces of paper here. I can sit here and talk for hours with all the stuff on this piece of paper, right? I can write for hours. Think about this. Egyptians invented this somewhere around 3000 BC because that's where papyrus plants were very, very plentiful there along the Nile. Of course, this stuff was also used for other things like fuel. Do we use paper for fuel today? Every time I go camping, I start a campfire with some watered up pieces of paper, so it makes good fuel, doesn't it? I don't know about eating it. I guess you could eat the plant. Ropes, right? Rope is basically made out of the same stuff. Clothing, sandals. Then somebody figured out, what you can do? You can flatten this stuff. You can put strips together. I think I have an image here. This is a papyrus plant. So they look like growing. Of course, they grew in very moist conditions. Need a lot of water to grow these. What they would do is they would take those plants. They could peel up the strips. Basically, it kind of like came apart in fibers that were long and skinny, and they could glue these together to make a surface. Somebody probably figured out, hey, these are kind of sticky. Maybe I can stick, look, 2 of these together. Oh, look, 3, 4, 5. We'll probably put 10 of these together. Next thing you know, and they're long, so I can make a big long sheet of these. That's an early papyrus sheet. Somebody figured out how to do that and went, hey, you know what? I'm sick of carving on broken pieces of pottery. I can write something on here. Maybe I can figure out a way to carve on here, or maybe, hey, the thing I was painting on the cave wall, we'll paint on this. You know, and ooh, my paintbrush got skinnier, and next thing you know, it's a point, and now I've got a little tiny, ooh, and I'm writing in a little, you see how I kind of migrate over time? Well, all of a sudden now I've got ways to capture many ideas, highly transportable, can roll this up, fold it, stack them, archive them, put them in a book, put them in a pile, and man, I could write War and Peace here on this stuff, right? What's the downside of papyrus?
Falls apart.
Falls apart. It's organic. It's going to disintegrate real fast. I don't know what kind of preservative went into this to hold it, but it's going to hold on for a while. I mean, I've been pulling papers out of my parents' stuff that's, it's yellowing and stuff, but it's pretty good. I mean, it's 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. It's, 80-year-old pieces of paper. It's holding up pretty good. This stuff's not going to hold up very long, right? This stuff's going to last, if you're handling it, a few years. It's just
Some
gonna,
papers deteriorate faster than others.
yeah, and if they get oxygen, if they get sunlight, they start to deteriorate. But it's really amazing, though. This paper invention really transformed societies and cultures and the human journey because of the transportability of it, the mass production of it. All of a sudden now, hey, I might have some papyrus plants growing out in my backyard. Maybe I can make my own paper. I don't have to be super wealthy. It was expensive, probably. It wasn't free and cheap, but it's more accessible than stone tablets, right?
Probably time consuming.
Probably time consuming to make.
So you'd need a maid or a
Yeah.
servant to help you.
Or somebody specialized in making paper. Right? Somebody who had access to the plants specialized, hey, I want to make paper, I'll sell paper, I'll trade it for chickens or whatever it is I need, and eggs and meat or whatever, and I'm a paper manufacturer. That's, I've gotten in the business of making paper. People that want paper can trade, buy the paper, and start to capture their thoughts. Papyrus, paper, Greek word chart came from this, right? And that was a sheet or a roll of papyrus. Latin word charta, so you see all these words that we have today. And then the Greek term biblios was a term for papyrus when there were lots of papyrus scrolls put together, lots of sheets put together, almost like a plural, right? So that term biblios comes from their word for papyrus. So you see, just like paper, paperback, right? That all is really fundamental in our psyche today. So the word Bible itself traces its origins back to these plants growing along the Nile River in Egypt. I think it's amazing. And then the last thing we'll talk about. So here's some writing on papyrus. So you can see this is holding up pretty good. I mean, it's probably was kept free of air for a long time and was buried or something, was able to survive. But this is likely what Christian writings would have looked like. So you can see this is Greek, written on papyrus. You can see the fibers in the sheet. You can see that there. You can also see how it starts to deteriorate around the outside. And that's why we're going to find out when we look at the texts, why we want lots of text. Because when we find these old papyrus sheets, there's chunks missing, right? And so very rare you have an intact book or an intact series of books that we can rely on. So we're looking for lots of these that we can kind of fill in the holes on. But that's what early Christian writings would look like. I think that's kind of fascinating. But then something a little more durable. They like the idea of this folding, rolling, stacking. That's a pretty good idea, but can we come up with something that holds on and lasts a little bit longer? And leather and parchment was the thing. Now this was also more expensive, right? It's like the hardback book of the day, right? If I buy it in paperback, I get it for $9.99. What's the hardback cost? $20. Yeah, so this is I look at it like the hardback of the day, right? But mention of this is made in Egypt as far back as 2500 BC. Essentially, animal skin is de-haired, soaked in a lime water. It's tanned by applying chemicals to try and get the color bleached out of it, perhaps. Stretched and dried on a frame. And it might come from small animals like sheep and goats and things like that. The term vellum is a term for parchment. And of course, we get that term veal because it's, right, refers to calf skin. So vellum, parchment, those terms are somewhat interchangeable. And many manuscripts from the Dead Sea area are written on leather, written on these parchments. The Jewish Talmud, their code of traditional laws, required explicitly that the law be written on animal skins. That's interesting. I think a lot about what God is saying to us through His command. I think about sing. Why are we commanded to sing? Why are we not commanded to play the piano?
They didn't have a piano then.
Okay, but why are we not commanded to play the trumpet?
They did have organs.
Okay, but why are we not commanded to play the harp and trumpet? And instead we're commanded to sing.
Those were man-made.
Those are man-made. 10-point, George gets first in line for lunch. Those are man-made. The trumpet's man-made. That's your workmanship. Your vocal cords, which you sing from. Whose workmanship is that? That's God's workmanship. And I think the same thing about this. Why tell them to capture God's law on animal skins? That's His workmanship. Yeah, it's His creation. Yeah. And so you're saying something about it, right? I mean, there is nuance that is powerful. Powerful nuance. Can I create that term? In what God is saying to us, right? Through His commandments. Why is He saying it? What is He telling us, right? Very interesting. Of course, it was more permanent as well. So the Old Testament writings were regularly copied on animal skins. This is very, very, very common. In fact, Paul mentions in 1 Timothy, he asked for the parchments to be sent to him, right? This is where these old scriptures would have been captured, would have been handed down and then passed down. Probably the Library of Alexandria was mostly parchments, right? Because they were durable, they would last a bit longer than papyrus. Papyrus is if you handle papyrus, it's going to disintegrate pretty fast. Just like any piece of paper. If I pass this piece of paper around a year later, I told you every day to pass it to somebody new, and you came back to me a year later, it would be greasy, mumbled, crunched, falling apart. Right. Whereas the leather, the parchments, are really going to hold on. So much more durable. And from the 4th century through the Middle Ages, the principal receptacle for writing God's Word was on parchments. In fact, a lot of the texts that we're going to see that we use to restore the New Testament especially are parchments, the ones that lasted today. The ones that are written on papyrus are long gone, for the most part.
You're so lucky to have come along in this day and age.
We are pretty lucky in a lot of ways. Yeah, we sure are. Along with that comes a lot of opportunity and challenge as well. I think about that all the time. That are we blessed to live today or are we not? I think the ability to reach people through a mass medium, to reach anyone in this room has the means to go out and get a notebook and a pen and capture your thoughts and pass it down and teach. Typewriter. I can do more on a used iPhone, right, than you could do on a Radio Shack Trash 80 in 1981. So you can do. There's so much opportunity there, but with that comes people who are
Educated.
way going off the tracks too. So, but I agree with you. I think we're very, very blessed to live in this day and age for sure. And what's to come? If this is where we've come to so far, are we done? Are we done developing? Are we done changing? Are we done growing?
No.
Are we done innovating? Something's going to come along behind this, right? Whether it's the microchip implant or something, I don't know what it is. But something's going to come along behind this and blow us away. What's that?
There's always somebody thinking.
Always somebody thinking, yeah. And I'm amazed and I'm proud as a Christian to see our brothers and sisters leveraging technology as well, leveraging what we have and what we've learned to a good purpose. So I'm encouraged about that as well. We should never be left behind because the early writers, God's early writers, weren't left behind, right? There wasn't anybody saying, well, I'm not going to use that papyrus stuff. I'm only sketching in stone. I'm not going to use that's how I do it the way I was. No, they kept up with technology along the way, and thank goodness they did, because that helps us today. If they didn't do that, how would they ever have captured the book of John in stone? How many copies of that would there be? We have lots of copies. We have actually some original, some very, very old manuscripts that we can look back to in parchment that have survived for us. So I think that's really good.
Carry this around in this stone.
Yeah, this is it. This is printed on paper. You can reuse it. Thank you all very much. Some examples of vellum. So it doesn't look a lot different than papyrus, but what's nice about it, it doesn't deteriorate as much, and it's a little more uniform. So that's another reason why I think that that became a God told his people to use animal skins to capture your word, and that's what the writers captured on for us today. And that's what got on the scroll. So that's how we got the Bible.
That's good.
All right, well, have a great week. Enjoy worship service, and we will see you guys next week. Thank you.